Throughout the history of the NBA, there are always going to be what-if questions, as there are numerous times in NBA history where if the domino just fell forward instead of backward, so many things would have played out differently. And in this video, we're going to go over 3 of those what-ifs, and I can tell you guys right now, we are not going to be addressing the what-ifs of if Derrick Rose got hurt, or if the Pistons didn't take Darko. Any of the cliche what-ifs we will not be talking about in this video, because let's just be real, those videos have been put out to death at this point on YouTube. But without further ado, before we get started with this video, I would like to give a shout out to the sponsors, and that is StarStock. StarStock is a new and improved marketplace for sports card hobbyists to buy, sell, and invest in their favorite athletes. Their goal is to enable sports fans to instantly trade cards like never before, and if you're not convinced, sign up today with my promo code YoungMustard and receive $10 free whenever you make a deposit of $10 or more. The link is down below in the description box. Check out StarStock today. But without further ado, let's dive right into it and start off with our first what if, and that is Kawhi Leonard being drafted by the Indiana Pacers. Now at the time, the Pacers were a different team than they were now, as during this time Paul George had not even ascended to all-star level yet, and around him were players like Roy Hibbert, David West, Danny Granger, who was in his prime and was actually a pretty good player at the time, and a bunch of other solid players around him. But it was very clear that the Pacers needed a playmaker to pair with Paul George and Danny Granger. For the case of Paul George, it would have really helped his development, and as far as Danny Granger goes, he was at his peak at the time, so you could have even gotten more out of him, because with the point guard that's going to be able to create open shots not only for himself but for his teammates, in particular Danny Granger and Paul George, it just seemed like a very sensible direction to trade Kawhi Leonard, who was the 15th pick in the draft, for George Hill. And at that time, based on what the Pacers needed, like I said earlier, it did make sense. George Hill was a solid backup point guard in San Antonio who could space the floor and defend, and he was young, so there was no concern about his age being a problem. But unfortunately, we saw how that turned out. Paul George became a star, Danny Granger declined rapidly, and George Hill, he was just mid. In the case of Kawhi Leonard, we all know his story, multiple-time NBA champion and finals MVP, and one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the game. And I think the worst thing about this is looking back on it in 2021, because considering where the Pacers are right now, it's probably the worst place to be in the NBA. They're in purgatory. Not good enough to be contenders, but they're not bad enough to tank. And that's the worst thing you want to be in the NBA. And knowing that if they had just stuck with their draft plans of taking Kawhi Leonard and not trading him to the Spurs would have changed all of that potentially, yeah, that really sucks. I know it hurts Pacers fans, but at least we got to see this duo in LA. Just sucks that they never got to play for Indiana like they were originally intended to. But let's move on to our next what if, and that is something that a lot of people forget, and that is if Steve Nash stays in Dallas. Now, to just set the stage here, Steve Nash was a solid point guard even before he went to Phoenix. People forget he played originally in Phoenix in his rookie and sophomore seasons as he was originally drafted there, then later went to Dallas and had some really solid years that went under the radar. As in his last 4 years in Dallas, he put up averages of around 15 to 17 points a game along with 8 assists on really good efficiency of 48, 42, and 90 shooting splits. He would also make 2 All-Star teams and 2 All-NBA third teams during that time span and established himself as a solid point guard in the NBA. But unfortunately for the Mavericks, in the summer of 2004, the Phoenix Suns came calling and offered Steve Nash a 6-year, $63 million deal. But unfortunately, Mark Cuban did not want to match the offer, as his original deal was a 4-year deal worth $36 million, and the 5th year was partially guaranteed. So off of the contracts alone, it's very obvious why Steve Nash left Dallas for Phoenix. Now, I gotta say this, in the case of Mark Cuban, I don't blame him too much for not matching that offer. That's a lot of money back then, and considering the fact that Steve Nash never made a first-team All-NBA, never even made a second-team All-NBA, and even in those 4 years in Dallas, there were a couple of seasons where he wasn't even an All-Star. And considering that at that time Steve Nash was 30 years old, it just did not make sense to match that offer. But I do understand the other side of things, because for one, you were pairing Steve Nash with Dirk Nowitzki, and after multiple postseason appearances and even an appearance in the Western Conference Finals, you have to do everything possible to keep that duo together, because what other options do you have? And just imagine how things would have been if Steve Nash was on the Mavericks in 2006. Maybe they actually beat the Miami Heat instead of lose in 6 games. Let's not forget they were up 2-0 in that series, so that is a very possible scenario. Instead of Mark Cuban complaining about the league rigging it for Dwayne Wade, he could have been watching Steve Nash and Dirk do pick and pops in the finals on Shaq's old ass, but I guess he settled for the other option. But that then brings us to our final and I believe most interesting what if in the NBA right now. And honestly, it might be the biggest reason why I made this video, and that is if Donovan Mitchell was drafted by the Denver Nuggets. Now, I know a lot of you may be surprised, but yes, D-Mitch was drafted by the Nuggets with the 13th overall pick in 2017 before being traded to the Utah Jazz in exchange for Trey Lyles and them trading down to the 24th overall pick, in which they selected Tyler Lydon. Now, I don't know who Tyler Lydon is, nor do I care to look him up, but I do know a little something about Trey Lyles, and that's where this trade just boggles my mind. I don't understand what was the point of doing this if you're the Denver Nuggets. You trade down 11 spots in the first round, and yes, Trey Lyles was a solid shooter in the front court, but he's not a great defender and he's injury prone. And nobody knew D-Mitch was going to become the star that he became. I understand that. But D-Mitch was still a lottery pick. He still had some type of value that you could have added to the roster. Coming into the NBA, he was still seen as a positive on defense, which is something that at the time they didn't have much of. And as great as the core they have of Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., and Jamal Murray in Denver, just imagine adding Donovan Mitchell to the mix. My goodness. That would be deadly. But to be fair, the Nuggets, it's not like they're an incompetent organization. They just made one mistake that required hindsight to even see at the time. And as they say, hindsight is 20/20. And looking back at that situation, who really knows what would have happened if they got D-Mitch? It could be a case where there's too many mouths to be fed and D-Mitch doesn't get his opportunity to shine that he did in Utah. Or it could be a situation where D-Mitch takes Jamal Murray's spot and Jamal Murray never becomes the star. Or Michael Porter Jr. never becomes a star. I mean, who really knows? We'll never know. And that's the beauty of what ifs in NBA history. But that concludes this video, you guys. Let me know your opinions down below in the comment section. And do not forget to subscribe to this channel as well as my second channel and put them both on post notifications. You will get content every single day. So stay tuned for that. And make sure you check out the Nothing But Action podcast. The link is down below in the description box to our YouTube channel and all of our audio platforms. But that concludes this video, you guys. Stay blessed and have a great day. I'm out. Peace.